we'll certainly be doing more live shows when the new year comes around. But right now, for this hour, we're going to be speaking to James Snell shortly, Senior Advisor for Special Initiatives at the New Lines Institute for Strategy and Policy. We're going to talk to him about the Qatar World Cup, how it's all worked out, and how really now people are only talking about the football rather than about all of the human rights abuses, all about the LGBT problems. You might remember at the beginning of the World Cup, Gary Lineker, amongst others, and also the Human Rights Brigade, including people like Alan Shearer and Alex Scott, all footballers, decided it would be a great idea to do a Match of the Day special on human rights. God knows why they thought that was a good idea. It certainly wasn't a good idea in my view. But of course now they all look a bit stupid because the World Cup has really gone down rather well. And I think everyone who's been to Qatar has talked about what a great occasion it was, how well it's been done, how well it's been carried out, and how brilliant Qatar is as a place to visit. Not least because there's no drunken fans falling about all over the place and insulting each other and fighting. So, it's fascinating to see that that is happening even as we speak. And, of course, the big games this weekend, England-France tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Today, we've got the Argentina game going on. We've also got Portugal playing tomorrow as well. There's all sorts going on. Let's talk to James Snell right now to find out whether it's actually true to say that sports washing actually works. James, a very good afternoon to you. Welcome.
Hello. Nice to be with you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that there's hardly any talk now of the human rights abuses, the dead migrant workers, the LGBT problems in Qatar. People are simply talking about how great Qatar is to visit, what a nice place it is to go, how friendly they are there, and how successful, really, the World Cup has actually been.
Yeah, broadly. We certainly have a lot of people who are still talking about the other stuff, but they have been vastly drowned out by the majority of people who've just watched the football.
Right.
And this is the thing about authoritarian states. When they orchestrate spectacle and when they harshly control the domestic arena, they can put on shows like this, and we can only be impressed.
They have spent an awful lot of money, though, haven't they?
Well, they have a lot of money.
It's all they have, right?
Exactly, yeah, nothing else. I mean, they're about 30% of their total population, 70% is foreign.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and that's the other interesting thing, because I mean, there's a lot of Westerners living there, aren't there?
Yeah, loads. You know, much like Dubai, whose population is, I think, 80% foreign, something like that.
Yeah.
These entire areas, including Saudi Arabia as well, which has a big native population, but it's sustained largely by foreign talent, foreign workers of all grades of the income level.
Right. And Qatar, of course, will be more well known mostly for property owning in Britain, I suppose, and the supply of natural gas that we buy an awful lot of from them. What do you think they hope to do now, having had a successful World Cup? I mean, where does that take them in the sort of world map?
Difficult to say, because they have a very interesting, sophisticated media propaganda system, and we're essentially buying into it by agreeing that they staged the World Cup rather well. For example, Al Jazeera is a Qatari station. In English, it's supposed to be very impartial, almost the BBC of the Arab world. That's the claim they make.
Right.
In Arabic, it's ferocious, very sectarian, violent, big fan of Osama bin Laden, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it also has a propaganda arm aimed at the young. So there's a social media-focused brand called AJ+, which is very into social justice, that sort of thing, with the intention of capturing young Western liberals. And it's doing pretty well, I would say.
Right. And, I mean, is any of this surprising to you? Because I think an awful lot of people... I mean, I know a bit about Qatar purely simply because my daughter works out in the Middle East, and so she goes there quite a lot, so I've got a kind of connection. Yeah. But most people wouldn't have known much about the country before this year, would they?
No, I suppose not. It's a linchpin of some of the regional strategy. There's an air base there, for example, which was used in the Afghan evacuation.
Yeah.
I think many people who study the Middle East know Qatar as a bit of a troublemaker. They hosted the Taliban embassy, for example.
Right.
That was where all
they're the only place that's got a Taliban embassy, aren't they?
Exactly, yeah. Well, I think China may open one soon, but at the moment Qatar has.
Well, that's interesting you mentioned China, actually, because I'm told China is kind of moving in to Qatar in quite a sort of seditious way as well, so every time you peel off the, the front cover of the Qataris' kind of, money, there's something Chinese underneath.
Well, there's Chinese money basically everywhere. But yes, they opened a naval base in the Horn of Africa and Djibouti pretty recently.
Right.
And that they are going to significantly expand, I'm sure, their presence in the Arabian Gulf.
Yeah.
And all of that area, the Red Sea, everywhere.
And that's the other interesting thing about Qatar, isn't it? Because they're quite good friends with Iran, which is unlike Saudi Arabia. So they don't get on terribly well with the Saudis. So is that a sort of an unfortunate line that could get worse, you know, in terms of the way that they don't get along with each other?
Possibly. There was a major blockade in the past decade in which the Saudis basically tried to choke Qatar off from the rest of the world. And this was a really energetic campaign. It was waged with the UAE as well. It was really significant. And then all of a sudden, pretty recently, it ended. And the Middle East, it's one of those areas where, you know, your worst enemy last week is your best friend next week.
Yes.
Because you need them for something else.
Right.
So their relations could easily deteriorate. They certainly have.
Right.
But at the moment, everything seems pretty stable.
Yeah, because we saw the UAE sort of forging new ties with Israel, didn't we, this year, this past sort of 18-month period. But Qatar, I think, are still not that friendly.
No, well, most Arab states, their populations aren't friendly with Israel. They feel the Palestinian issue very strongly. And, you know, we can debate as to how much of this is native, as it were, and how much of it is inculcated by their leaders as a way of getting the population to hate the right people. The UAE is a paradox, a real enigma, because they are Russia's best friend as well. And, you know, they're working with Russia in Yemen, in Libya. It's and with France in Libya as well. So it's a bizarre thing.
Yeah.
As I say, it's a snake pit.
It really is. And it's one of the reasons why the Russian sanctions aren't really working, isn't it? Because Russia is still doing quite a lot of business in the Middle East. They're doing plenty of business in Dubai. And as long as that axis is kind of open, then it doesn't really matter what we do with Russia, does it?
Well, it does matter a great deal, because the Western alliance, which is seriously sanctioning Russia, is the vast majority of global GDP. We have the vast majority of all high technology. Sanctions are having a very serious effect on Russia, in the sense that, for example, Lada, the state automaker, has made a sanctions-proof car which has no airbags, no anti-lock braking, no chips. All of these things. It's quite bad. I mean, it will materially affect living standards. That said, yes, Russia does have many authoritarian allies who are doing far more than I think our media does cover in order to help them. You know, China is very much in Russia's camp and has been from the beginning, and people don't seem to know this.
Well, I mean, we occasionally report on things like the news that broke about how Russia's gas was now being bought in large number, or quite big numbers, by the Chinese, because the stuff that they were selling to Europe, which they can't now sell to Europe, is being bought by China.
Yes, and it's being bought by India as well at something like a 60% discount.
Right.
So, again, this isn't fantastically economical for Russia. And, of course, it's simple economics if you're India. You want cheap oil, you want cheap gas.
Yeah. Yeah, well, why can't we get some of that?
Well, because we've decided, correctly in my opinion, that essentially land wars in Europe are a bad thing, that we can't incentivise this kind of behaviour because it will inevitably happen again. You know, Hungary, this is not confirmed, but it is suggested, and I think it's increasingly likely, that Hungary was approached before Russia invaded Ukraine, possibly quite a long time before, and told, would you like a bit of Ukraine? And the Hungarians said, oh, yes.
Right.
So this is the kind of thing we would be like.
Well, they're very pro-Putin in Hungary, aren't they?
Absolutely. Well, not the population isn't necessarily, but the government certainly is, yes.
No,
they are Russia's Trojan horse within NATO, within the European alliance, and they're China's Trojan horse as well, which is also concerning for the future.
Interesting. And talking of Europe, there was a very odd story middle of this week, which we sort of broke when it happened but didn't really do much with afterwards. But this kind of far-right coup in Germany, run by some sort of slightly mad prince. It all sounded a bit like the plot of a Peter Sellers movie. You're probably too young to remember who Peter Sellers was, but it's one of those
I'm a fan of Peter Sellers, right?
Well, I mean, I can imagine Peter Sellers playing this guy in a film. You know, tell us what happened.
It's a bizarre thing. The first indication we in the media got was the German authorities announcing this enormous wave of raids involving 3,000 police on 130 locations, arresting about 25 people. Now, these putschists, you know, there's a long history of this in Germany, of course. We had the Kapp Putsch in 1920. We had Hitler's Beer Hall Putsch in 23. These people are part of a larger organisation of oddballs and nutcases called the Citizens of the Reich. And they essentially don't believe that the German Empire, which existed between 1871 and 1918, ended. That everything that came afterwards is illegitimate. And obviously these people are maniacs and nutcases. But they have been repeatedly arrested. Quite a few were arrested in November, I believe. Yeah. And more of them have been arrested now. And what you have essentially is this outer core, this outer ring of lunatics, of whom there may be thousands. And then you have an inner core who are slightly more hardcore. They're ex-military. Some of them were, one of them was a judge. The other one was a former member of the parliament. and they formed an organisation called the Council, which is supposed to have initiated this plan to waltz into the Bundestag and take some hostages and take over the government. It's concerning.
Yes.
But the government today has announced that it seized quite a lot of weaponry, which is very concerning. And we know that there are neo-Nazi organisations which have been existing in Germany for a long time, and they have big weapon stockpiles which are frequently found. Thousands and thousands of bullets, tens of guns. It's a concerning problem. It's a problem.
It is. And I mean, could we then expect that there are other groups like this in other parts of Europe, in other countries?
Unquestionably, yes. There must be. In the sense that there are far-right organisations practically everywhere. Everywhere you have free debate, you have some maniacs. Those people tend to find each other in the social media age. And weaponry is pretty easy to obtain in certainly small quantities.
Yes, I guess
more or less anywhere in the world.
I guess so. And I mean, was there a particular objection that they had to this German government, or was it just in general an objection to the way that Germany, or modern Germany, has been run?
Well, I mean, you could argue that the existence of Germany as Germany is their problem. But at the same time, that they, much like many American conspiracy theories in the QAnon movement and people like that, people who tried to storm the Capitol on January 6th, 21,
right.
They had specific objections as well. You know, they believed that the country was run by a cabal of, whether they're paedophiles or Satanists, it's difficult to tell. You know, maybe they're lizards. It's all that same sort of thing, and it tends to pop up everywhere.
Yeah. Very disturbing, but thankfully it didn't get very far. James, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. James Snell there, Senior Advisor to Special Initiatives at the New Lines Institute for Strategy and Policy, also writes for this New Statesman and The Spectator. Just an interesting kind of global perspective there on what's happening in Qatar, because while you're watching the football, Qatar is cementing, I would say, its reputation in the Middle East as, in fact, the place to do business, the place that you can go and set up an office, the place where you can go to look for investment, and, of course, the place where modern society can feel at home and feel comfortable. So they've done a great job, I think, in sort of, if you want to call it sports washing, you can call it that. And I think the people who have been ranting and raving on about how dreadful it all is and how terrible it all is, I think have entirely been proven to have got that bit wrong. Because, as many other people have said, and I echo this particular point of view, you cannot go around the world dictating to people and telling them how they should run their own country. I think they run Qatar better than we run Britain. Now, you might say, well, they do because it's a dictatorship. Well, whatever it is that they do, it's a lot better run than we are. This is TalkTV.